Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes or so walking you guys through the insights that we found from our most recent retail sales data. So let's jump in. Sort of a lot to cover, but maybe before we get too into the details, just a quick moment to introduce ourselves. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Good Food Institute, we are an international nonprofit developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We do this around the world. We have about 180 staff members, and we try to work with stakeholders across the entire ecosystem as well. So our science and technology team works with researchers and students to advance open access research and create a thriving research ecosystem. Our corporate engagement team, we work with companies and investors to drive investment, accelerate innovation, scale the supply chain, all faster than market forces alone would allow. And finally, our policy colleagues, they advocate for fair policy and public research funding for alternative proteins. And we are fully funded by philanthropy, so individual donors and foundations who believe in this mission. And at GFI, the challenge that we're trying to address is the fact that, I think we're all aware that the way we currently produce meat, egg, dairy is unsustainable and it's inefficient. And it's also a key driver of climate change, environmental degradation, antibiotic resistance. But we also know that there's a solution, and one of the solutions is accelerating alternative protein. So creating the meat, eggs, and dairy people love, but in a more sustainable and efficient manner, whether making them from plants, cultivating them from cells, or producing them via fermentation. And we believe instead of asking consumers to give up the food they love, we can accelerate this transition by helping make alternative proteins be delicious, affordable, and accessible. And I think as part of our work to accelerate the alternative protein space, at GFI, we see it as vital that companies in the market have access to insights about the size and the growth of the plant-based food market. And therefore, we hope this data will help you make business decisions that will accelerate investment, innovation, and adoption of plant-based foods. So a little bit of background and level setting. All the data we're going to be discussing today is available on our GFI Europe webpage. You can go to gfieurope.org/industries where you'll get kind of all the key insights. But there you'll also be able to download the 14 different reports we have. So 1 Europe-wide report and 13 country-level reports. One update I would like to make is that after the publication of these reports, we discovered some errors on the part of our data partner in the UK plant-based cheese, yogurt, and dessert categories, as well as the Poland plant-based cheese categories. And these errors were due to a miscategorization, which led to some of the products not being taken into account. And so we're working to ensure, lessons are learned from this, and market analysts are able to provide comprehensive insights on this market in the future. But in terms of the impacts on our current reports, we have updated the sales numbers for these categories in the Europe-wide report, the UK report, and the Poland report, as well as the overall sales numbers and country comparisons in all the other reports. The key takeaway of this updated data is that the UK plant-based cheese, yogurt, and dessert categories are much larger than we originally reported, and the Polish plant-based cheese category is somewhat smaller. But my recommendation to you is if you've downloaded any of these reports, to download them again, because all of them have been updated to some extent with this new information. Okay, so what data are we actually looking at? So we work with NielsenIQ to understand the markets in 13 different countries: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Romania, and the UK. So you see, we tried to combine kind of what are kind of traditionally some of the larger markets for plant-based foods, as well as kind of some new smaller markets that are seeing some exciting growth. And then in terms of categories, for the plant-based sector, we looked at 10 different categories: meat, seafood, meals, milk, cheese, yogurt, spreads, cream, ice cream, dessert. Now, I will note that not every country had information on every category availability, often due to it, when a market is more mature, then they have more information on more categories. But in the reports, we always highlight for each of these categories which countries it encompasses. And then for kind of animal-based foods, we also got sales data for animal-based meats, milk, cheese, and yogurt, so we could do some comparisons between the two. And in terms of the facts that we're looking at sales value, so sales in euros, sales volume, so the number of units sold, and the average price per unit. During this presentation, I'll mostly be talking about the sales value and the sales volume, but the reports have lots more detail about the average price as well. So if you're interested in that, would recommend looking. And finally, we're looking at data from the last 3 years, so 2020, 2021, and 2022. All righty, so let's dive right in. The overall plant-based food market in Europe is a 5.8 billion euro market, and it's grown 21% since 2020. That's 21% both in sales value and in unit sales. And if we look at it on a year-by-year basis, we do see that the majority of that growth comes from the 2020 to 2021 period, and that growth decelerated slightly between 2021 and 2022. However, I think it is important to contextualize, that number and to think back about 2022 and the unique macroeconomic environment that was present at the time due to a number of reasons, including the ongoing war in Ukraine, global trade tensions, inflation. So while the growth of the plant-based food retail market did decelerate between 2021 and 2022, both unit sales and euro sales kind of still grew, which I think speaks really strongly to the demand there is from consumers for these products. And I think it's definitely a great kind of light point in a lot of the media headlines that we see nowadays with, plant-based is over, was plant-based a fad? Well, I think the numbers that we're going to talk about today demonstrate that that's definitely not the case. So if we break down the 5.8 billion euro market into different categories, this is what it looks like. So plant-based milk is the most developed of all plant-based categories at about 2.2 billion euros in sales in 2022. The second largest category is plant-based meat at 2 billion euros, and experienced 3% growth between 2021 and 2022. And almost every other category grew in the last year as well. The fastest growing categories were plant-based seafood, plant-based meals, and plant-based spreads, which you'll see all experience double-digit growth in 2022. And I think it's especially worth pausing at the plant-based seafood category. Obviously still the smallest of all the plant-based categories, but growing rapidly at 60% between 2021 and 2022, and a very impressive 326% since 2020. But we'll dive more into that later. Now, another way of looking at that data is to see how much each of the plant-based categories make up of the total plant-based food market. And you'll see together that plant-based milk and plant-based meat make up 73% of the plant-based market. So still quite dominant, but I think that we're seeing a lot of growth in these other categories as well. So expect that to shift and even out over time. Now, I mentioned that we also looked at animal-based categories, so we could do some growth comparisons. So what you see here is the difference between unit sales growth of a few plant-based categories and a few animal-based categories in 2022. And so you'll see that the plant-based categories, which are the turquoise color, unit sales growth of plant-based milk, meat, and cheese was kind of significantly larger than the animal-based categories, but also positive, while all animal-based categories saw declining unit sales growth in 2022. And so the reason that we're looking at unit sales here instead of sales value is that we feel it provides a more direct comparison in terms of kind of how much are consumers actually buying, because sales value is more influenced by inflation as well, which was something that was quite rampant last year, and is an area where actually animal-based categories were more impacted by, which we'll actually see on this next slide. So as I mentioned, we also looked at kind of average price, and this graph presents an overview of the average price kind of growth or increase for the different plant-based and animal-based categories in 2022. And once again, you can see that animal-based categories experienced significantly more price increases in 2022, a minimum of 10% for yogurt, up to 17% for milk, whereas all the plant-based categories stayed pretty consistent in their prices and seemed to be less impacted by inflationary pressures. I think it's also interesting to look at how does this market shape up in different countries. And so what we found was that Germany is the largest market for plant-based foods, followed by the UK, Italy, Spain, and France. And so these are the sales numbers for 2022, and underneath are the growth rates for that year. So although maybe not surprising, what are the largest markets? I think it's also interesting to look more at the right side of the graph and see some of the smaller markets: Poland, Denmark, Austria, Portugal, Romania. Although they're still relatively small, they are seeing some pretty positive signs of growth, demonstrating that there's increasing consumer demand in those countries as well. Another way to compare countries is not just to look at the overall market size for plant-based food, but also to look at the average spend annually per capita there. And when we do that, the rankings actually switch up a little bit. And so actually in the Netherlands, consumers on average spend the most on plant-based foods. Within the Netherlands, about 23.5 euros per year per capita, followed by Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and UK. So even in some of the smaller markets, there's strong consumer demand. Alrighty, so that was a bit of an overview of the general market. Let's look at some of these categories in more detail, starting with plant-based meat. So maybe just to note, when we talk about plant-based meat, we are talking about both products that can be considered analogues, so products that really try to mimic the appearance and taste of animal-based meat, as well as of non-analogues, so vegetable-based patties. But we do not include tofu and seitan in this category. So in 2022, plant-based meat was a 2.01 billion euro market. It has grown 19% in sales value between 2020 and 2022, which actually outpaced the growth of conventional meat sales by almost 5 times. And the unit sales comparison is also pretty striking. So while plant-based meat sales grew 21% between 2020 and 2022, conventional meat unit sales decreased by 8% in that period. And at the end of last year, plant-based meat had a 6% market share of the total retail prepackaged meat category. So I think it is important to pause on that for a second. NielsenIQ is only able to report on prepackaged animal-based meat sales. So this doesn't include over-the-counter purchases from kind of butcher stations, for example. So all the comparisons and the market share is based on prepackaged meat sales. But in that respect, plant-based meat has a 6% market share. If we look at the country comparison, again, Germany has the highest plant-based meat sales, followed by the UK, Netherlands, Italy, and France. But if we look at it on a per capita basis, the Netherlands scores, again, the highest, followed by Sweden, UK, Germany, and Denmark. Now, for a few categories, we were also able to get a little bit more detailed insights on kind of what types of product formats were the most successful. So here are just a few call outs from the reports, but would recommend looking at kind of the country level reports if you're interested in specific kind of segment level insights, because those are unique to each country. But for Germany and the UK, which are two of the largest, or the two largest plant-based meat markets, in Germany, the top product formats was kind of a combination of burgers, mince, and nuggets, followed by cold cuts and sausages. And the UK, it was pieces and strips as the most popular format, followed by sausages and burgers. Now, maybe to talk about the smallest category real quick, plant-based seafood. As we said, it's a 43 million euro market. It's grown 326% since 2020 in terms of sales value, 343% in terms of unit sales. So still quite small, but really impressive growth and demonstrates there's strong consumer demand for these products, which is exciting to see. All right, let's talk about a few of the plant-based dairy categories now. Starting with plant-based milk. So plant-based milk in 2022 is a 2.21 billion euro market. The value of plant-based milk sales grew 19% between 2020 and 2022, which was almost twice as much as conventional milk. And once again, the unit sales comparison is also pretty striking. So while plant-based milk unit sales grew 20% between 2020 and 2022, conventional milk unit sales decreased by 9%. And at the end of 2022, plant-based milk had an 11% market share of the total milk category. Here as well, we were able to gather a couple more segment level insights. And we found that oat milk is the category leader, followed by soy milk and almond milk. But interestingly enough, oat milk is the only segment actually seeing growth in terms of sales value and sales units, whereas both soy milk and almond milk sales are decreasing. And if you want to get more detailed insights on this type of segment level information, would recommend you check out the country reports, which give more details on a country by country level. So Germany has the highest plant-based milk sales, followed by Spain, Italy, UK, and France. In Germany, the market is about 552 million euros. But if we, once again, break it down on average annual spend per capita, then Sweden and Denmark have the highest average spend. So maybe you're starting to see a bit of a trend here, but especially the Sweden and Denmark markets, although definitely not the largest in Europe, on an per capita consideration, rank really high. So there's very strong kind of consumer purchase dimensions there. Now, looking at plant-based cheese. Plant-based cheese is a 165 million euro market. The value of plant-based cheese sales grew 56% between 2020 and 2022, which was more than 6 times as much as conventional cheese. And while plant-based cheese unit sales grew 62% between 2020 and 2022, conventional cheese unit sales decreased by 4%. Nevertheless, plant-based cheese is still a very small market compared to conventional cheese, and currently has about a 0.5% market share of the total cheese category. Looking at the country comparison, Germany also has the highest plant-based cheese sales at about 78 million euros in 2022, followed by the UK and the Netherlands. And if we look at that on a per capita basis, Germany also has the highest average spend, followed by Sweden, UK, the Netherlands, and Denmark. The final dairy category is plant-based yogurt. It is currently a 515 million euro market. The value of plant-based yogurt sales grew by 8% between 2020 and 2022, and unit sales grew by 10%. In comparison, conventional yogurt unit sales decreased by 4% in 2020 and 2022. Nevertheless, this is the only category, plant-based category, that saw a small sales value decrease between 2021 and 2022. And currently, plant-based yogurt has about a 4% market share of the total yogurt category in Europe. Looking at the country comparison again, Germany has the highest plant-based yogurt sales, followed by France, the UK, the Netherlands, and Italy. And if we look at it on a per capita basis, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany rank at the top. All right, and then a few of the other categories. Starting off with plant-based meals. So when we talk about plant-based meals, we're talking about refrigerated and frozen prepared meals, including sandwiches, curries, pastas, vegetable dishes. This category kind of differs across country in terms of how it's defined, but in general, should just be considered as ready meals. In 2022, it was a 181 million euro market, and it's grown 79% in sales value and 71% in unit sales between 2020 and 2022. So definitely one of the faster growing categories. Then plant-based spreads. Plant-based spreads is made up of both kind of vegetable-based spreads like a hummus, for example, and plant-based dairy spreads. And butters and margarines, for example. Once again, the categorization depends a little bit per country, so would recommend looking at the country level reports to see how this kind of shapes out. But across Europe, in 2022, plant-based spreads is a 247 million euro market, and it's grown 40% in sales value and 26% in unit sales growth since 2022. Plant-based cream is a 139 million euro market, growing 7% in sales value and 1% in unit sales since 2020. Plant-based ice cream is a 174 million euro market, growing 14% in sales value and 15% in unit sales since 2020. And finally, plant-based dessert is a 88 million euro market and has grown 27% in sales value and 40% in unit sales growth since 2020. And actually, the plant-based dessert category is mostly made up of pudding, just so you know. All right, so that gives a quick, run through of kind of the key data and insights from the reports at a Europe level. Maybe just to pause and reflect really quickly. So what are the key takeaways of this data? Well, we know that the plant-based food sector grew 21% in sales value and unit sales over the past 2 years, and saw positive growth as well last year. So once again, the narrative that the plant-based food sector is dead, that it was just a fad is definitely not the case. I think there's real light points in some of these categories in some countries where we're seeing significant growth and opportunity, especially in a very challenging macroeconomic climate. If we compare it to animal-based categories, animal-based meat, milk, cheese, and yogurt categories all experienced declines in unit sales in 2022, and were more impacted by inflation and higher prices. So important to keep that in mind when we talk about the plant-based sector and how well it's doing, that a lot of kind of the challenges that the broader food sector is facing right now apply to all categories. And finally, I think it's great to see this amount of growth and consumer interest even in tough times. But the success of the sector is not inevitable, and sustained growth is not inevitable. And there's really 3 key drivers of consumer adoption: taste, price, and convenience. So if we want to continue to see this sector grow in the coming years, companies must continue investing in product innovation to develop plant-based products that really meet consumer expectations when it comes to these key drivers. So with that brings us to the close of this formal presentation, and now happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that, Carlotte. Really, really fascinating. So first up, we had a question about whether you have any insight into why the plant-based yogurt category seems to be going down. So I think this was where we saw other categories like milk and meat growing, and plant-based yogurt was down slightly. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, we don't have a lot of insight into it. I mean, the decline that we saw was pretty minuscule at minus 0.4%. So in that respect, wouldn't read too much into it. It also kind of differs across country, whether that category is declining or not. I think it just goes to show that there's still opportunities to improve products there and to better understand where we're missing kind of consumer expectations. But no, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that.
Cool. Another question. So someone was saying that year on year, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK seem to be positioned as the most important or the largest markets for plant-based products. Do you have any insight into why that is? The person suggested, is it availability or is it consumer purchase power? Just what are the main reasons for success in those countries, do you think?
I think it's really a combination of factors. One, I think there is the most availability of these products in these markets. And convenience and availability is obviously a great driver. I think because these categories are more mature in those markets, prices have also come down more there, which makes it easier for consumers to buy them. But also consumer kind of surveys demonstrate that, especially in Germany, for example, there are really strong environmental kind of drivers as well for consumers that, along with maybe the regular kind of purchasing drivers, taste, price, and convenience, are pushing consumers more to this category. Actually, at the same time as we released this data just 2 or 3 weeks ago, the German Agriculture Ministry published their data on conventional meat consumption. And they showed that, once again, in the past year, conventional meat consumption in Germany went down about 4 kilograms per person, down to from 56 kilograms per person per year to 52 kilograms per person per year. So that's really a market where we're starting to see some actual displacement happening between kind of animal-based products and plant-based products. And that's kind of what the agricultural ministry said as well. In the UK, animal welfare tends to be a higher driver that are bringing consumers to these products. So I think it's really a combination of factors. But in general, it is true that more in Southern European countries, the average kind of spend per capita is a little bit lower, but the overall market size is still quite impressive, which demonstrates really a strong opportunity to expand there.
Great, absolutely. It'd be great to see expansion in those countries. We had one question around whether more of the growth is coming from new product launches or just organic growth of existing products. I don't think we have exact data on that, but do you have any sort of analysis from your side?
That's a really good question. No, unfortunately, we don't have any data on that. I would imagine in some of the smaller categories, like plant-based seafood, cheese, cream, desserts, there it's probably really being driven by more product launches because the availability wasn't very wide and still is relatively limited. Whereas in the more mature categories like plant-based meat, milk, yogurt, it's probably more existing products that are growing, because I think, you know, as a lot of maybe brands know, there's a lot of competition out there, especially in these most mature categories. And so it's now more about finding kind of a differentiating value proposition. And it's getting harder for new products to be successful.
That makes sense. Thank you. So next question is whether you think that the whole category of plant-based foods will continue to grow in terms of the space in store, or do you think that some of the smaller but growing segments might take space away from the meat and milk? Do you think there's sort of a finite space for plant-based options in the supermarket, or will we see more shelf space?
No, I think we'll definitely see more shelf space. In general, consumer surveys show that consumers want to eat more sustainable products. But there is a couple of criteria that are important from them. Top of the list, no surprise, is taste, health as a driver, and then, you know, having the products that are at a good price point and are widely available. And so I think these more mature categories, plant-based meat, plant-based milk, are starting to get there. I mean, the fact that plant-based milk has an 11% market share of the total milk category is quite impressive, and I think demonstrates where other categories can get to as well. But there's just still a lot more work that needs to be done in meeting kind of consumer expectations on those kind of drivers.
Great, thank you. Question here, kind of tapping into the inflation issue, which is just whether price is becoming less of an issue as animal protein prices are increasing more. What do you see as the sort of impacts of inflation and the patterns that we're seeing there around price?
Yeah, that's a good but tough question. It's true that due to the fact that animal-based products seem to be more impacted by inflation, we're getting closer to price parity. Nevertheless, we also know that the majority of plant-based food consumers are flexitarians. So people that occasionally eat plant-based, but maybe for the majority of their time eat animal-based. And so during tough kind of economic situations, during times of inflation, when budgets tend to be tighter, most consumers probably will still forego the plant-based option if it's more expensive, even if it's getting closer in price parity. So I think it's good and that brings it closer, but yeah, it doesn't solve all the problems because yeah, purse strings are tighter all around.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating area and it'll be interesting to see how it develops. One question here around where we see declining animal-based sales alongside growing plant-based sales. Similar sort of angle here. Can we assume that consumers are making a switch, or is there a bit more nuance to be had there?
I think there's definitely more nuance, and it's something that we at GFI are looking into to understand what level of displacement is happening and how much consumers are moving from animal-based to plant-based categories. Unfortunately, I don't think you can say if unit sales of animal-based meat decreased by 4% and plant-based meat increased by 4%, that it's fully due to that switch. I think there are definitely links, but we're looking into that and hoping to better understand kind of the consumer journey. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some more insights into that soon.
Great. Question I've just spotted in the chat actually is around whether we have any insights into which part of the plant-based meat category is driving the growth, whether it's the meat analogues that are matching taste, or whether it's the more vegetable-based patties that we see. Again, I don't know if we have concrete data on this, but whether you see any patterns or whether you can sort of forecast a little bit onto where we see the growth.
Yeah, unfortunately, the data we received, it doesn't enable us to look at that level. However, all our kind of consumer research shows that the majority of consumers are looking for products that really try to replicate animal-based products, so to be the analogs. So I would assume that the majority of the growth is in these segments, and that's once again the segment that I think appeals more to the flexitarian consumer, which is really the market for these products, whereas the vegetable-based products maybe are more geared towards vegetarians and vegans, which is just a smaller proportion of consumers.
That makes sense. So a bit of a more forward-looking question here. What do you expect for 2023? Someone says that in Germany, the prices for plant alternatives have caught up to inflation. So yeah, price is going to be a factor there, but what are you kind of seeing happening in this year?
Yeah, good question. I wish I had a crystal ball and we could look into the future. You know, I think 2023, similar to 2022, is going to be a tough year, to be honest, for the entire food sector. Inflation is still at play. Supply chain challenges. So I would expect that this year, you know, growth will remain tempered to some extent due to these challenges. But I think that shouldn't dissuade us as an industry, because it's not kind of unique to plant-based foods. And we know there's still so much that can be done to improve kind of products and meet consumer demand. So I think we need to continue to focus really on the long term, on how do we make it as easy as possible for consumers to choose these products.
Right. We have a few questions coming in that are more around whether we have additional data on areas like tofu or plant-based or spending levels for animal-based products. I think the best thing for people to do is to download the reports and really just take a deep dive into exactly all of the data that we've got there. I think I'm right in saying that tofu hasn't been included, but yeah, the best place to look for that detail is in the reports. Great, so I think we're wrapping up with most of the questions now. I guess one question from me is around getting into a bit more of the detail of what does the sector need to do if we're going to keep this growth going over the next few years in Europe? Yeah,
I mean, maybe just to repeat myself one more time, but I think repetition is important here. You know, once again, consumer surveys show that taste and price are two of the key drivers for consumers in purchasing any product really, but also in for plant-based products. And surveys also show that taste and price are areas where consumers feel we have not achieved parity yet, really across any of the categories. So I think we need to see more investment and resources in product innovation to figure out how to get to that next level, to really recreate the experience of animal-based products. And we, as a sector, as an industry, need to kind of scale up the supply chain to bring down prices. Obviously, with the Ukraine war as well, and kind of global tensions over the past 2 years, the plant-based sector has not been immune to kind of supply chain challenges, increases in pricing of input crops. So I think more time and investment needs to be put in there as well to scale up the supply chain and the infrastructure we need to bring down those prices.
Great, thank you. That's really clear. I think it sounds like we need better products and more availability. So
yeah, exactly.
Great. One last minute question that's come in is, how do you think the plant-based cheese market is going to evolve in Europe?
Well, there's clearly a lot of demand for plant-based cheese. There was a pan-European survey done 2 years ago by the Smart Protein Project across 10 European countries that asked, what is one of the products you miss the most and you want the most? And that's plant-based cheese. And we're seeing the sector grow. I think this is definitely a category where it's also been difficult to reach kind of taste parity and achieve the same functionality in the products. But there is a lot of innovation happening right now to get closer to parity. So I think consumer demand shows that if we're able to continue to improve these products, the category will grow. In other regions, we're starting to see hybrid products being brought to market, leveraging kind of other technologies, for example, precision fermentation to add kind of whey or casein proteins. I think here in Europe, it's going to be a while before we get to that point. So I think the focus should be on how can we continue innovating in the plant-based category.
That sounds like a really good kind of final takeaway. Great. I think we've answered all of the questions that people had. So I guess just any kind of final closing remarks, Carlotte, and then we will let people go.
No, just thank you for joining. I hope this gives a little bit of a sense of where the European market is right now and how it fits into the global picture, and especially kind of addressing kind of this global narrative that plant-based is dead. It's definitely not that dead. Consumers want it. Sales are going up. There's, I think, opportunities across all categories to enhance the products and to bring it to more consumers. So let us know what you think. Email us if you think there's certain things we should have included in the report and that we didn't. We'll take that all as lessons learned, as we hopefully are able to provide this information more frequently in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlotte, and thank you to everyone for joining. We'll be sharing the recording. Thanks, everyone.